Night settles slowly over the old stone room, and somewhere beyond the dark doorway, a lamp is beginning to burn with a steady, golden point of light. The air is quiet, the floor is cool, and in that stillness a simple human question seems to linger, the same question people have carried for thousands of years. What are dreams really, and why do they come to us when the world is dark? In ancient Egypt, dreams were not treated as meaningless. They were noticed with care. They were remembered. Sometimes they were written down. A dream could feel like a private visit, a message, a warning, or a small piece of guidance from a world that was hidden during the day. And because of that, sleep itself could feel a little sacred, a little watched over, as if the mind were walking softly through a corridor lined with symbols. So tonight, we can stay in that quiet corridor for a while. We can look at dreams as the Egyptians might have looked at them, slowly, gently, and with a kind of patient wonder. Nothing here needs to be rushed. A dream is not a stone tablet. It is more like water in a bowl, always moving a little, always changing its shape when you try to hold it. The ancient Egyptian world was full of signs. The sky had signs. The river had signs. The flight of birds, the shape of the Nile flood, the movement of shadows, all could matter, so it makes sense that dreams mattered too. If you woke with the memory of a lion or a staircase or a voice heard in darkness, it might feel like part of the same great pattern. Not a puzzle to be solved at once, but a pattern to be lived with quietly. A person in Egypt, perhaps a priest, perhaps a traveler, perhaps someone simply lying awake after a long day of work, would have understood that the border between waking and sleeping was soft. It was not a wall. It was more like linen hanging in a doorway, moving slightly in the night breeze. A thought could pass through it. A memory could pass through it. A dream certainly could pass through it. And in many places, people sought dreams on purpose. There were special sleeping spaces connected to temples, where a person might rest with hope that sleep would bring insight. This practice is sometimes called dream incubation, though the ancient people themselves would have simply known it as a meaningful night of waiting. They would come with a question, a worry, a wish, and then lie down in a sacred place and listen to the night. That is a very human act, to ask the darkness for help, to be still enough to hear what rises up. In a temple courtyard, the day might be full of movement, priests walking, offerings being carried, vessels of water, the sound of sandals against stone, but by evening the tempo softens, the birds quiet down, the air loses some of its heat, the shadows grow long, and in that gradual change, sleep begins to feel less like forgetting and more like entering another chamber of experience. The Egyptians also created dream texts, lists of dream images and their possible meanings. Some dreams were judged favorable, others not so favorable. A dream of seeing oneself in water, a dream of eating certain foods, a dream of meeting a god. These were all the kinds of things people might try to understand. The lists are ancient, but the impulse behind them feels familiar. If you have ever woken from a dream and tried to make sense of it before breakfast, you know the feeling. There is something tender in that effort. A dream slips away quickly. It leaves only fragments like feathers on a path. You remember a color or a door or a sound that seemed important while you were asleep and then became strangely fragile in the morning. The old dream lists were one way of keeping those feathers from vanishing entirely. And yet, even with lists, dreams stayed partly elusive. They still belonged to the night. They still arrived without permission. A dream could be ordinary and then suddenly strange. A room could become a river. A dead relative could appear calm and almost nearby. A person could fly or fall or walk through a house that had no corners. The mind makes these scenes without consulting us. It is a quiet artist working behind a closed curtain. If you imagine someone in ancient Egypt waking just before dawn, the room pale with the first light, the feeling of the dream still present, you can almost see them lying very still, trying to keep it in mind. Outside, the world would already be beginning again. A heron might call from the river. A potter might be preparing clay. Someone might be sweeping a threshold. But inside, for a moment longer, the dream remains its own small world. The Egyptians were not alone in this. Many ancient cultures treated dreams as something between everyday life and sacred speech, but Egypt had a particular habit of preserving, cataloguing, and giving shape to what others might have let drift away. That habit feels very human too. We keep what matters to us, especially if it cannot be touched. We make lists of things we cannot hold. There are old surviving papyri that show this careful attention. On one side, practical writing. On another, guidance, ritual, and interpretation. The material itself is plain in one sense, just reeds, ink, and papyrus, but the thoughts carried on it are intimate. Someone long ago sat and wrote down a dream sign so it would not be lost. The page became a kind of shelf for the night. And the night in Egypt was not empty. It had gods in it. It had watchers, it had journeys, it had protection. The sun god traveled through the underworld after sunset, making a long and dangerous passage before rising again. That cosmic story is not exactly a dream story, but it belongs near dreams because both speak in images of passage, descent, return, and transformation. Both suggest that darkness is not simply a blank page. It is a place with movement in it. This may be one reason dreams felt so important. They were personal underworlds. Small nightly descents. A person closed their eyes and went somewhere they could not map with ordinary tools. They might return with no message at all, or with a feeling, or with a vivid scene that stayed in the mind like lamp smoke on a wall. The language of dream interpretation could be simple and strangely practical. A good dream might promise well-being, a better harvest, a safer journey, or divine favor. A troubling dream might suggest caution. Yet even when ancient people interpreted dreams seriously, they still lived with uncertainty. The dream was never fully domesticated. It remained a guest, and guests can be mysterious even when they are welcome. There is comfort in that. Not everything in human life needs to become precise. Some things can stay soft around the edges. A dream can be felt rather than solved. It can be kept as a mood, a symbol, a little inward weather. In some Egyptian settings, the very act of sleeping near sacred space may have carried reassurance. A person lying down in a temple sleep chamber would have been surrounded by carved forms, protective words, and the presence of gods associated with healing or guidance. If sleep itself was a crossing, then the temple could function like a safe bridge, narrow and quiet, leading across. You can imagine the details. A smooth stone floor, perhaps cool under a mat, a folded cloth, a vessel of water nearby, the scent of oil, the hush that comes after the last movement of the day. And then the slow surrender to sleep, not as a failure of wakefulness, but as a deliberate resting place. Dreams often blur the line between memory and imagination. Ancient people knew memory well. They kept genealogies, offerings, records, seasonal cycles. They knew that the past could remain present in meaningful ways. So when a dream brought back a dead loved one, or a god, or a forgotten place, it would not have seemed impossible. It would have felt like one more way the world continued to speak. In modern life, we often try to explain dreams in technical terms, as activity in the brain, as processing, as pattern making. Those are useful ideas. But in the old temple room, perhaps the more immediate truth was simply this: a dream feels real while it lasts. It has atmosphere, weight, and emotion. It can make the heart beat faster or slower or just feel oddly calm. That feeling itself was worth attention. There were also dreams of protection. A dream could be a shield or a warning that helped a person avoid harm. In a world where travel could be difficult, medicine limited, and the Nile powerful and unpredictable, any source of direction may have felt precious. A dream might say in symbols what a waking voice could not. A dream could be indirect and therefore safe to hear. And yet the Egyptians seem to have understood that not every dream needed dramatic treatment. Some dreams were simply part of nightly life. The body sleeps, the mind moves, the sleeper returns. That ordinary rhythm is part of what makes the whole subject so gentle. There is no need for every dream to become an oracle. Sometimes the night is only the night, and that is enough. Still, the attempt to interpret dreams reveals a deep wish to live attentively, to notice patterns, to treat inner life with respect. A person might ask, what does this image mean? Why did that symbol appear? Why this animal, this color, this door? The questions are old, but they still sound fresh in a quiet room. Perhaps the most restful thing about dreaming is that it allows the mind to wander without consequence. In daylight, choices matter. In sleep, the mind can roam. It can meet impossible architecture, ancient relatives, talking animals, long halls, desert winds, underwater cities, or cities made of dust and gold. The body remains still. The inner world travels, and when the dream passes, there may only be a trace, a sensation like having visited a place whose name you cannot quite remember. That feeling of near recollection is one of the loveliest things about sleep. It is not demanding. It is not useful in any strict way. It just hangs there, soft and incomplete, the way moonlight hangs over water. Ancient dream lists sometimes judged images by whether they were favorable or unfavorable, but real dreaming is often stranger than simple categories. A dream that seems disturbing can leave behind peace. A dream that seems pleasant can leave unease. Meaning does not always follow appearance. The Egyptians, with their careful record keeping, may have noticed that too. Human experience is rarely neat. Same is true of morning memory. A person wakes, stretches, blinks at the wall, and the dream begins to thin. Maybe one image survives, maybe a phrase, maybe the sense that someone was there. The brain is very quick to release what it has just made. That quick vanishing is almost like a kindness. We are not asked to hold everything. In the temples, dreams could also connect the living to the divine in a way that felt immediate. Not abstract, not far away, but close enough to the sleeping body. The sacred did not only live in grand ceremonies. It could arrive in a dream chamber quietly at the edge of consciousness. That is a very small doorway and a very large one at the same time. There are old images of people sleeping in shrines, waiting for a god to answer. They might dream of a healing remedy, a warning, or a command. To modern eyes, this can seem distant. But the underlying mood is familiar. A worried person lies down, the room is dark. The mind continues to work. Hope and uncertainty stay close together. The ancient Egyptians also knew that sleep itself could be vulnerable. The body is less defended in sleep. The mind is less guarded, so protection mattered. Amulets, spells, rituals, the presence of divine figures, all could help create a sense of safety. It is easy to forget how soothing protection can feel, even if it is symbolic. A familiar charm on the bedside table, a lamp, a prayer, a phrase repeated softly, these are very old comforts. Dreams probably carried emotional value as much as interpretive value. Someone might dream of a parent and wake with grief or relief or a strange calm. Someone else might dream of a future event and feel prepared, even if only a little. The dream does not have to predict anything to be meaningful. Sometimes it simply rearranges feeling. A dream can be a tiny theatre, but it is a theatre built from the materials of daily life. Faces seen during the day reappear with new expressions. Rooms from memory grow longer or darker. Streets become rivers. Familiar objects take on unusual importance. A spoon, a ring, a doorway, a staircase, all can become central. The mind is not aiming for realism. It is arranging significance. And because significance is hard to pin down, people have always tried to make language around it. That is part of what the Egyptians did. They turned dream events into records, records into patterns, and patterns into guidance. It is a very patient kind of knowledge, not loud, not hurried, just attentive. Even the idea of a dream book feels restful in a way. A book to consult after waking, pages turned slowly in the morning light, a list of symbols in need of interpretation. Such a book does not shout, it waits. And waiting is a skill that suits the night. Sometimes we imagine ancient life as harsh, but it was also full of gentle routines. Water carried in the evening, lamps trimmed, beds prepared, doors closed. The day put away piece by piece. Then, when sleep came, it brought a private world to each person, one that no one else could see directly. That solitude is common to all eras. The pharaoh and the farmer both closed their eyes in the same fundamental darkness. There is something level and democratic about sleep. It softens status, it quiets titles. In the dream world, rank may matter less than emotion, memory, and image. A powerful ruler and a child both encounter odd symbols in the night. Both must wake and make sense of them, or not make sense of them at all. A person in ancient Egypt might have wondered whether a dream was sent by a god, born from the body, or shaped by the soul's own movement. Different answers could coexist. That is another comforting thing about the subject. It does not demand a single interpretation. It permits layers. It allows uncertainty to sit beside belief. The Egyptian word for dreaming carried a sense of seeing, of experiencing in a special way. That makes good sense. Dreams are not only thoughts. They are seen, felt, heard, inhabited. They are like small rooms that open inside the mind. You can walk into one without moving your feet. And because dreams are made in private, they can be deeply personal even when they use shared symbols. Two people may dream of the same river, yet the river may mean something different in each life. One sees a crossing, one sees loss, one sees home, one sees the end of a season. This is why dreams remain such gentle companions to human curiosity. They are common but never entirely identical. It is easy to imagine the old temple sleeper hearing the distant sound of night insects, or the occasional movement of fabric, or the softest footstep in a corridor. These sounds would not disturb the sleep so much as frame it. The mind, in that kind of setting, can drift more easily into symbolic motion. The outer room is quiet, so the inner room speaks more clearly. There is also the simple fact that dreams happen every night, or nearly every night, whether we remember them or not. That quiet regularity is one of the least flashy wonders in the world. Every evening across every century, human beings lie down and enter a hidden theater of images. No trumpet is needed. The performance begins anyway. Ancient Egyptians were not the only ones to pay attention, but they were especially good at leaving traces. Their record-keeping lets us glimpse this soft, elusive part of life. The fragments are small, yet they are enough to show a civilization looking inward with care. Not only outward toward monuments and kings, but inward toward the private weather of the mind. That inward attention has a calm dignity to it. It suggests that a dream, however brief, matters because it happened to a person, because it shaped feeling, because it brushed against the boundary of consciousness and left a mark. This is true even now. A dream may be forgotten by noon, but while it was present, it was fully there. If you have ever woken before dawn with a dream still warm in the mind, you know the odd tenderness of that moment. The room is unfamiliar for a second. The body is heavy. The dream seems to hover just beyond reach like a bird in dim light. Then the day begins to gather around you and the bird moves farther away. Ancient people knew that moment too. They may have responded with prayer or with record or with a quiet gesture of remembrance. Perhaps they spoke the dream to another person. Perhaps they kept it private. Either way, the dream had already done its work. It had visited. It had altered the inner landscape, if only slightly. There are some dreams that feel like architecture. You move through hallways, staircases, rooms that should not fit inside one another. Ancient Egypt, with its monumental stone spaces, might have encouraged such imagery in waking life, but dreams have their own architecture too. They build structures from emotion and memory, not mortar. Yet those structures can feel more real than the walls around us. And then there are dreams of the dead, which many cultures know well. In Egypt, where ideas of afterlife were richly developed, a dream visit from someone who had died may have felt especially significant. It was not necessarily frightening. It could be comfort, a brief return, a sign that a relationship was not entirely gone, only changed in form. That thought can be very soothing at night. The boundary between life and afterlife in ancient Egypt was often imagined as permeable, carefully guarded, and ritually navigated. Dreams fit naturally into that worldview. They were one more place where contact could happen without physical arrival. One more corridor, softly lit, between states of being. A sleep chamber in the imagination becomes less like a bedroom and more like a waiting place. Not anxious waiting, but patient waiting. the kind of waiting that belongs to evening when the sky deepens gradually and nobody needs to rush. In such a room, a dream can come and go like a traveler passing through a gate. The more we sit with this topic, the more ordinary and mysterious it becomes at once. That is often the case with the oldest human concerns: food, water, breath, sleep, memory, loss, and dreams. The daily and the sacred are not always separate. They touch at the edges, they share a table, they share the dark. In Egypt, where the landscape itself could feel immense and exacting, dreams may have offered a softer kind of geography. A person who had spent the day in sun and labor could enter a world of symbolic shade. There the meanings were not carved in stone. They drifted, they changed, they suggested rather than commanded. That uncertainty is part of the comfort. A dream does not insist on immediate mastery. It arrives and one may receive it, or not. It vanishes and one may remember only a thread. Thread is enough. A human being can live with a thread. Sometimes that is all the mind wants to carry into morning. The ancient dream texts, with their entries of favorable and unfavorable signs, may seem tidy from a distance, but behind them is a life full of complexity. People hoped, feared, wondered, and slept. They woke and consulted the meanings or their memories or their priests. The result was not certainty, but a shape of attention, a disciplined way of noticing what the night had brought. And attention itself can be restful, to observe without panic, to wonder without urgency, to allow a symbol to remain a symbol. This is a useful posture for bedtime too. The mind can follow the old Egyptian habit here, gently cataloguing what appears, then setting it down again. A dream is a guest made of vapor. It visits the room of the self. It sits for a while. It leaves crumbs of feeling. It may return or may not. The ancient Egyptians, in their careful, lamplit way, knew how to leave space for such a guest. Not everything in the human night is meant to be solved. Some things are meant to be received quietly and then allowed to soften. A dream, after all, is already a kind of fading. It begins by arriving and ends by becoming memory, and then ends again by becoming almost nothing. That almost nothing still matters. It is part of being alive. The Nile would keep flowing whether a person dreamed or not. The stars would keep their positions. The temple stones would cool in the dark. Yet in one sleeping chamber after another, thought would continue to move through its hidden pathways. That movement, small and private, is one of the oldest sounds in the world, though no one hears it with the ear. If the room grows quieter now, that only suits the subject. Dreams do not mind quiet. They seem to prefer it. They bloom best when the day loosens its grip. They drift in when the breath slows. They leave by dawn, carrying whatever shape the night gave them. And perhaps that is enough to remember tonight, that dream life was not separate from ancient life. It belonged to it naturally, like shade belongs to a palm tree, like water belongs to a riverbank. It was woven into the ordinary human wish to understand what comes to us in darkness. So we can let the thought rest there on the edge of the lamplight beside the cool stone and the folded cloth. Dreams were watched, written, honored, feared, and cherished. They were private and communal, sacred and practical, fleeting and memorable. They were and still are one of the quietest ways the mind speaks. And as the night continues, the questions do not need answers all at once. They can remain soft. What does a dream mean, if anything? Why do some images return? Why do some vanish before morning? Why does sleep make room for such strange, tender theatre? The questions can stay open like small windows in a warm wall. Outside, the dark deepens a little. Inside, the room grows more still. Somewhere in the old imagination of Egypt, a sleeper turns slightly and the dream continues for a moment longer. A door appears. A river shines. A voice speaks without urgency. Then the scene softens and the mind moves on. There are many other quiet details that belong here, and they can rest alongside the larger ones. The way a person might prepare for sleep after a long day of heat, washing dust from hands and face. The way linen feels when folded. The way clay lamps burn low and steady. The way a household settles into layered silence, with each room holding its own small breathing. Dreams in such a setting would not have felt strange as visitors. They would have felt like part of the house of night, like water jars, like folded blankets, like the distant bark of a dog outside the wall, like the breath of someone asleep nearby. Not everything sacred needs a grand altar. Some of it lives in the simplest corner of a dark room. That may be why the dream subject keeps returning through time. It is intimate but not fragile. It belongs equally to kings and workers, priests and children, travelers and scribes. It reaches across the centuries because the sleeper in every age is the same basic human creature, waiting in darkness for the mind to do what the mind has always done. And the mind, even when resting, is never entirely empty. It sorts, arranges, revisits, compares, softens, reorders. Sometimes it creates a temple, sometimes a river, sometimes a face, sometimes nothing that can be kept. The night is generous in that way. In ancient Egypt, that generosity was met with reverence, with lists, with temple sleep, with careful thought, with the understanding that a dream could be more than a private fantasy and also less than a literal message and still be worth listening to. That balanced respect feels wise and calm. So if you are listening now in a room of your own, you might imagine that same patient attention. A lamp somewhere nearby, a corridor of shadow, a page waiting for morning. A dream not yet arrived but already possible, the body resting, the mind loosening its grip a little, the night becoming friendly around the edges, and because this is bedtime, we do not need to hurry toward an answer. We can remain with the gentle fact that people have always gone to sleep hoping, at least sometimes, that the night might say something kind, not necessarily clear, not necessarily dramatic, just kind. The Egyptians knew that sleep could carry messages, but they also knew it could simply carry the self from one day to the next. That is enough for one life, enough for one household, enough for one quiet chamber in a house of stone. As the hours move on, the lamp flame trembles once, then steadies again. The room listens, the darkness listens, and somewhere beyond thought, dream begins to gather, not as a command, but as a soft arrival. There were also practical rhythms around sleep that mattered in ancient times, and these rhythms make the subject feel even more human. A person might lie down early if the day had been hot. Another might sleep in segments, waking in the night and then returning to rest. The exact pattern could vary by season, labor, and household. Sleep was not one fixed thing, but a living habit shaped by climate and need. In Egypt, where the river shaped so much of daily life, the day itself had a pulse. Morning work, midday heat, evening calm, night vigilance. Dreaming came inside that pulse as naturally as breathing. It did not need a special invitation, but when invited it could feel especially meaningful. The old world often linked dreams with healing as well. A person seeking relief from illness or distress might hope for a dream instruction, perhaps a medicine to try, perhaps a ritual to perform, perhaps simply reassurance. This gives dreams a gentle, practical role. They are not only poetic, they can be useful or at least feel useful, which is often the same thing in moments of uncertainty. And while modern minds may want to separate superstition from insight, ancient lives were lived in a more blended way. A symbol could be both sacred and practical. A dream could be both private and communal. A night vision could be both strange and ordinary. The categories were not always rigid. That flexibility has its own peace. If one were to stand quietly in an imagined Egyptian sleeping chamber just before sleep, one might notice how simple the scene really is. Stone, cloth, oil, breath, dark, and yet each of those plain things carries deep human significance. Stone holds memory, cloth softens the body, oil keeps the lamp alive, breath steadies the self, dark gives the dream room to move. The dream texts that survive from Egypt are not giant libraries. They are fragments enough to tease the mind and invite it to linger. A line here, a symbol there, a hint that someone long ago cared enough about the night to write it down. That care is almost more moving than the content itself. It says this mattered. This small, slippery thing mattered. It is lovely that human beings have always tried to domesticate mystery without destroying it. We name a thing so we can approach it, but the name never fully contains it. Dreams are like that. A category helps. An interpretation helps, but the dream itself remains larger than the label. Perhaps that is why the subject is restful. It asks us to sit beside uncertainty without alarm, to notice, to wonder, to accept that a little darkness remains. The Egyptians, with their temple lamps and dream books, seem to have done exactly that. And in a way, this bedtime listening follows the same path. We move slowly through the room of the subject, looking at one soft detail and then another. A carved bed, a waiting priest, a papyrus page, a symbol of water, a god glimpsed in sleep. None of these things needs to hurry. Each one can remain for a moment before dissolving into the next. The night itself is full of repetitions, and repetition can be kind. The same stars, the same hush, the same cooling air, the same turning of the body under cloth, the same drifting of thought. In that repetition, sleep finds a home. The ancient Egyptians built for permanence in stone, but dreams remind us that not everything important is built to last. Some things are important precisely because they pass. A dream leaves no monument, only memory, and memory in the morning may already be fading. Still, while it was present, it was a world. That is a small wonder worth holding gently. A whole world made and unmade in a single night. No wonder people wanted to understand it. No wonder they made lists. No wonder they asked for help from gods and temple spaces. If a world appears inside you after dark, you may wish to know its language. And perhaps the language is less like speech and more like weather. A dream arrives as a mood, a shape, a temperature. Warm, cool, anxious, bright, heavy, floating. Ancient dream interpretation often tried to pin these things to meanings, but the feeling itself remains essential. It is one reason dreams can seem so personal even when their symbols are common. A person dreaming in Egypt might see a crocodile, a staircase, a crown, a river, a bowl, a scarab, or a familiar face. Each object could be read in more than one way. The old interpreters knew that. The world was not flat with certainty. It was layered, and the dream was one of its most layered expressions. If the listener drifts a little here, that is fine. The subject itself is drifting. The night does not demand sharp edges, it allows gentle returns. So we return to the simple room, to the quiet lamp, to the old wish to understand why the mind makes such moving pictures when the body is still. There is a kind of mercy in not remembering every dream. Imagine if every night left a full archive, the mind would be crowded by its own theatre. Instead, most dreams dissolve. What remains is enough. A scent, a feeling, a fragment of colour. A sense of having travelled very far without getting up. Ancient Egyptians, with their attention to cycles, would likely have recognised the value of this letting go. The river floods and recedes. The sun sets and rises. A dream comes and leaves. The pattern repeats. In such a world, impermanence is not a flaw. It is the way life moves. And yet, because humans are humans, we still want to hold the dream a little longer. We want to say, wait, what was that? We want to tell someone or write it down, or at least turn it over once before it disappears. That impulse is ancient too. It lives in the oldest dream texts and in the modern habit of reaching for a notebook at the bedside. The bedside notebook, the temple papyrus, the whispered interpretation, these are all versions of the same gesture. A hand reaching out to preserve a shape made by sleep. Very simple, very old, very human. In the Egyptian imagination, the afterlife and the dream world both belong to hidden passage. One is grand and final, one is brief and nightly, but both ask the living to trust that not all journeys are visible. This makes dreams feel less like odd accidents and more like rehearsals of a deeper truth. Consciousness is larger than the daylight self. That is a thought we can keep softly without pressing on it. Larger than daylight. That is enough. Now the room is even quieter, and perhaps the old lamp has nearly burned down. The stone chamber does what stone chambers do, holding coolness and silence. Outside, the desert night continues, wide and patient. Inside, the sleeper is near the border of a dream again, maybe without noticing it. A dream may begin with no warning at all. A face, a path, a voice, a stare, a river. Then the mind enters. Then the world changes, and all of it happens in a place more intimate than speech. The ancient Egyptians, who loved order and symbol, gave that place a dignified attention. They made space for it, they listened. Listening is a beautiful response to mystery, not forcing, not hurrying, just listening. The sleeping chamber with its lamp and shadow seems made for that. A listener does not need to catch every word. Sometimes the tone is enough. So we can let the tone of this old subject remain with us a while longer. Dreams are private, yet they connect us across time. A person in ancient Egypt and a person tonight may both wake with a fragment of something strange and try to understand it before breakfast. The distance between them is large, and the feeling is nearly the same. There are also dreams of ordinary errands, of walking to market, of losing an object, of being late, of searching for a room. Even these small, everyday dreams may have occurred in ancient times, though only fragments survive. It is reassuring to think of that. The grand civilization with its temples and royal names was also full of very ordinary dreaming minds. The ordinary is often overlooked, but it is the bedrock of history. Most nights were not dramatic, most dreams were not famous, yet they filled countless sleeping hours, one after another, like water filling countless small jars. The cumulative quiet of that is almost overwhelming in its own way. Imagine a household in Egypt after sunset. The cooking is finished, the tools are set aside, the lamps are low, someone whispers a final word, someone turns over on a mat, a child grows still, an elder breathes slowly. Within that ordinary ending of the day, dream begins its work. No announcements, no trumpets, just the subtle shift from waking thought to sleeping image. This transition is one of the softest thresholds in life, and one of the most persistent. Every living person crosses it again and again, often without noticing the exact moment. The ancient people who wrote about dreams understood in their own language that the threshold deserved respect. It is respectful to the self to pay attention to what appears in sleep. It is also restful. To notice a dream is to notice that the mind remains active in silence, which can feel reassuring rather than strange. And so we linger in this quiet historical room a little longer, with the old dream books, the temple chambers, the oil lamps, the careful scribes, and the sleepers who ask the night for guidance. Their world is gone, but the experience remains familiar. That is the gentle power of this topic. Even now, if someone wakes from a vivid dream, there may be a moment of stillness before the day begins. A pause, a breath, a small attempt to understand. That pause is ancient. It belongs to Egypt and also to us. We can let the edges of the subject soften now, as sleep softens edges. The chamber darkens. The lamp lowers to embers in the imagination. The river keeps moving somewhere beyond the walls. And the old human question remains, not demanding an answer, only settling beside the pillow. What visits us in the night, and why does it sometimes feel so close to truth? Perhaps tonight that is enough to wonder about. Perhaps wonder itself is part of the dream. A calm, drifting form of attention that lets the mind rest while still being curious. The Egyptians would likely have appreciated that balance. A mind that watches and then sleeps. A sleeper who trusts the dark. So let the room remain quiet. Let the papyrus rest. Let the stone bed hold its shadow. Let the lamp become only a warm point in the distance. And as the last thoughts slow, remember that dream is one of the oldest companions of the night, ancient in Egypt and still softly present wherever someone closes their eyes. The night continues, but we do not need to continue with it. We can simply be here in the dim and gentle space where sleep begins to gather. The mind loosens, the breath evens out, the old chamber of dreams opens quietly once more. And in that quiet opening there is nothing to fear and nothing to chase, only the soft inheritance of human sleep, the same then and now, drifting onward, calm and incomplete until morning comes. And perhaps that is the deepest charm of ancient sleep. It reminds us that even in a civilization known for monuments, for royal power, for stone carved with permanence, there was also this fragile, vanishing thing. A dream appears bright and unsteady, and then it is gone. It can leave a meaning, a feeling, a warning, or only a faint echo. It resists being kept. It does not become a statue. It does not sit in a treasury. It slips through the fingers of history, and yet history keeps trying to hold it. The ancient Egyptians were very good at holding on to what could be held. They preserved bodies. They copied texts. They painted scenes of daily life on tomb walls. They stored grain, measured time, tracked the river, and named the stars. But dreams were different. Dreams belonged to the borderlands of the mind. They belonged to the hours when a person was least visible and yet perhaps most inwardly alive. That may be part of why dreams were so compelling. They were intimate, private, and strangely universal. If we imagine the ancient sleeping chamber again, we can notice how much of it is made of absence. The absence of noise, the absence of movement, the absence of daylight. Yet within that absence, life does not stop. Breathing continues, the heart keeps its rhythm, the body repairs itself in ways unseen, the mind wanders, images form and fade, even the silence has activity in it. This is true in every age, but in ancient Egypt it must have felt especially meaningful in a culture that paid such careful attention to cycles. The rising and setting of the sun, the flooding and retreat of the Nile, the planting and harvesting of fields, birth, death, renewal. To sleep was in a small way to enter another cycle. Night brought its own order. Dream may have seemed like a miniature world with its own logic, its own hidden river. There is something restful in thinking of the ancients not only as builders of temples, but as people who lay down at night and drifted into uncertainty like everyone else. They too may have had trouble sleeping sometimes. They too may have woken suddenly from a dream that left the room altered. They too may have listened to the night sounds and felt the thin boundary between the human world and the unseen one. And in that unseen one, they found meaning where they could. Not every dream was sacred, perhaps, but many were treated with caution. Some dreams might have been ignored, some may have been laughed at in the morning, yet others were worth writing down. The fact that a dream manual survives at all tells us that someone long ago thought the night was worth studying. Someone decided that sleep was not empty, but full of messages, patterns, and possibilities. That decision feels quietly modern and at the same time very old. People still try to understand dreams. People still compare symbols, talk about recurring scenes, and wonder why certain images return. In that sense, the ancient Egyptian dream interpreter is not so far away. The tools differ, the world has changed, but the basic curiosity remains familiar. Imagine the scribe bent over papyrus in soft light, the reed pen making small, deliberate marks. Imagine the surrounding stillness. The rest of the household may already be sleeping. Outside, the night air moves over courtyards, roofs, and gardens. Inside, a written dream becomes something more durable than the dream itself. It becomes part of a conversation between the sleeping mind and the waking world. Some dreams in ancient cultures were believed to come from divine sources, while others may have been seen as warnings, memories, or bodily disturbances. This mixture of belief and observation is interesting. It suggests that people did not separate the marvelous from the practical as sharply as we often do. A dream could be both a mystery and a clue. It could be sacred and ordinary at once. That duality seems very Egyptian in spirit. The temples and tombs were full of symbols that served more than one purpose. A painted bird might be decoration, representation, and spiritual sign all together. A chamber might be both a physical room and a site of ritual. The sleeping chamber, too, could be more than a place to lie down. It might be a small threshold between visible life and invisible meaning. And yet, even with all this symbolic weight, the simplest facts still matter. A bed must be made. A mat must be laid out. A blanket, if there is one, must be folded or pulled close. A room must be cooled after the heat of the day. A lamp must be trimmed. A person must settle their body. Ancient life was made from these plain actions. History often looks grand from a distance, but close up it is astonishingly domestic. It may help to imagine the textures, the woven fibers of a mat, the smoothness of a wooden frame, the roughness of stone under a lamp's base, the smell of oil, the dust that settles after sunset, the faint sound of insects or distant voices, the coolness that arrives later in the night after the day's warmth has finally left the walls. These sensations, though ordinary, are the true fabric of every bedtime, ancient or modern. Sometimes one imagines the Egyptian night as somehow more dramatic than our own, but much of it would have been deeply familiar. Darkness in most places is darkness. A body resting on a bed is a body resting on a bed. The shape of sleep has changed less than the shape of cities. This is one of the quiet consolations of history. It reveals continuity where we might expect strangeness. At the same time, there were elements of the ancient sleeping world that were distinctive. Temples may have housed special chambers where people sought healing or guidance. Sacred spaces were not only for prayer in the daytime, but may also have been associated with dreams at night. In some traditions, sleep itself could be a way of approaching insight. To rest in a holy place and await a dream was to invite the invisible to speak in a gentler voice. Whether one believes in that or not, the idea is beautifully patient. Instead of demanding an answer immediately, a person lies still and listens through sleep. It is a form of trust, trust in the gods, perhaps, trust in the mind, trust in the night to arrange its messages in the right order. There is something almost tender about that trust. Egypt's long history also encourages patience. The civilization lasted for millennia, changing slowly, accumulating layers of custom and belief. A sleeping chamber from one period would not have been identical to one from another. Furniture changed, architectural styles changed, religious language changed, yet the basic human posture at night remained the same. The body reclines, the eyes close, the world becomes inward. This inwardness may have felt particularly important in a society so rich with external symbols. Pharaohs, temples, processions, offerings, carved names, painted gods, and monumental entrances all pointed outward toward shared meaning. But sleep draws attention in the opposite direction. It turns the mind toward private space. It is a personal kingdom, small and temporary, where a person is both present and absent. And perhaps that is why dreams were so intriguing. They seem to be evidence that the interior world mattered. Not only the public world of work and ritual, but the hidden world of imagination and memory. In a sleep state, a person might encounter a deceased relative, a god, an animal, a river, or an impossible place. Those encounters might feel random, yet they could also feel charged with significance. The Egyptians were not alone in this. Many ancient cultures treated dreams as meaningful. Mesopotamian texts contain dream interpretation. Greek writers later reflected on dreams with great seriousness. In many places, sleep was not merely a break from the day, but an opening into another layer of reality. The ancient world was, in this sense, very awake to the possibilities of sleep. Still, we should not make the ancient Egyptians into people who spent every night decoding cosmic messages. Most likely, many nights were plain and sleepy. A mother soothed a child. A worker collapsed after labor. A priest rested between duties. A farmer listened to the slow dark. Dream interpretations existed alongside fatigue, hunger, habit, and the wish simply to get through the night in peace. This ordinary dimension matters because it protects the topic from becoming too mystical. Ancient people were not constantly surrounded by revelations. They were also tired humans. Their chambers were places of rest first, interpretation second. The body needed sleep because life needed renewal. That simple fact is enough to make the sleeping chamber interesting. One can imagine how a room might have changed from evening to deep night. Early on, there might still be traces of daily life. A cup on a low table, a folded garment, a shadow on the wall from the last lamp. Later, all becomes more indistinct. Sound softens, shapes merge, the room seems larger and smaller at once. Time itself loosens. In such a space, a dream could begin almost unnoticed, like a small current beneath still water. The quietness of ancient interiors is easy to forget. We tend to imagine bustling marketplaces and large ceremonial spaces. but the private room has its own history. There are no inscriptions on most beds. There are no surviving manuals for every household habit. The evidence is fragmentary, which only makes the subject feel more delicate. We reconstruct by suggestion. A bedpost here, a depiction there, a passage in a text, a scene on a wall. From these scattered traces, we build a gentle picture. That picture is necessarily incomplete, and perhaps that incompleteness suits the subject. Sleep itself is incomplete in memory. Dreams vanish when handled too roughly. History, too, often arrives in fragments. There is a kinship between the lost nature of dreams and the lost nature of the ancient world. Both ask us to accept what cannot be fully recovered. And yet something can be recovered. Atmosphere can be recovered. A sense of attention, a willingness to imagine carefully. If we do that, the sleeping chamber becomes vivid not through spectacle but through restraint. A low bed. A quiet corner, a household settling into darkness. The knowledge that somewhere beyond the walls night animals move, and beyond them the broader landscape lies under the stars. The stars themselves would have mattered greatly in ancient Egypt. They were not just lights but markers of time and direction, woven into religious and cosmological thought. To look upward on a clear night was to see order and mystery together. The sky was not empty. It was alive with pattern. In such a world, dreaming under the stars might have felt less private than it does now, and perhaps more connected to the wider structure of existence. The notion that a person could sleep and receive a message or a warning or a glimpse of what lies beyond ordinary sight fits naturally into such a sky. The heavens were already a place of divine association. The night sky itself was a kind of chamber, vast and shadowed, crossed by stars like small, steady lamps. The earthly sleeping chamber could then be understood as a mirror of that larger enclosure. This is one of the lovely harmonies in ancient thought, the small and the large reflecting one another, a tomb chamber reflecting the sky, a royal bedchamber reflecting cosmic order, a sleeper's dream reflecting divine communication. Whether literal or symbolic, these connections gave depth to quiet spaces. Of course, many of the surviving ancient texts come from elite contexts. They show us scribes, priests, nobles, and royal concerns more readily than they show us the everyday beds of ordinary people. That is a limitation worth remembering. The sleeping chamber of a farmer's household would have looked different from that of a wealthy official. Materials, space, and comfort varied. Not everyone slept on finely made furniture. Some slept on mats or simple platforms. The history of sleep, like the history of everything else, was shaped by class and circumstance. Yet, even with those differences, the emotional shape of night could still be similar. A person with little might still have a dream with a great deal. A simple chamber might hold deep thought. A poor room might still become, in the dark, a world of images as rich as any palace. Dreams are remarkably democratic in that way. They visit without regard for rank. That may be part of their enduring fascination. Dreams ignore many of the boundaries that waking life insists upon. They cross social lines. They blend times and places. They allow the dead to appear beside the living, the familiar to become strange, the small to grow immense. In a civilization so attentive to order, the disorder of dreams must have been both unsettling and wonderful. The ancient Egyptian response to that disorder seems to have been not to dismiss it, but to give it structure. Dream books, interpretation lists, ritual contexts, healing practices, divine associations. These are all forms of structure. They do not remove mystery, but they make it livable. They create a framework within which the unpredictable can be approached with care. That too is restful to think about. Human beings have always tried to create a little order around the unknown. We dim the lights. We repeat familiar routines. We keep certain objects close. In ancient Egypt, this might have included protective amulets, spoken words, or ritual habits. The goal was not necessarily to eliminate uncertainty, but to make the night a little more habitable. There is a softness in that human impulse, a desire to soothe the boundary between wakefulness and sleep, to place something small and meaningful near the pillow, to believe that the room is watched over, to hope the dream will be kind, or at least revealing in a gentle way. Such hopes may be ancient indeed. If we continue to imagine the sleeping chamber, we might notice how the body itself becomes part of the room. Once motion slows, the sleeper nearly belongs to the furniture, the floor, the darkness. The room holds the body, and the body holds the possibility of dreams. This quiet exchange between person and place is one of the most intimate things in life. In this way, the chamber is not only an architectural space but a psychological one. It is a place where daily identity loosens. Titles, roles, duties, and faces fade. The mind turns to images that may have no public meaning at all, and yet those images can feel more real than the day. Ancient people knew this. They might not have used our language for it, but they recognized the experience. Some dreams, as surviving traditions suggest, were thought to be especially significant if they repeated, or if they involved certain symbols. Water, serpents, birds, gates, journeys, light, darkness, and temples often carry layered meaning in ancient cultures. Egypt was particularly rich in such symbolism. The Nile itself was not just a river, but a life-giving force, a cosmic presence, a rhythm of renewal. To dream of water in such a world may have felt especially charged. Likewise, the appearance of animals in dreams could have been meaningful. Cats, ibis, falcons, crocodiles, lions, and serpents all occupied important places in Egyptian imagination. A dream animal might not merely be an animal. It might be a messenger, a warning, or a reflection of hidden qualities. Even today, animals in dreams often feel distinct, as if they arrive from a different layer of attention. The Egyptian pantheon, with its hybrid beings and symbolic forms, blurs the line between natural and divine in ways that suit dream thinking. A god with a falcon's head, or a deity linked to the sun's daily journey, already belongs to a realm where transformation is normal. Dreams similarly transform. They take what is known and make it strange without fully breaking it. That is perhaps why the ancient sleeping chamber can feel so meditative as a subject. It is not dramatic in the ordinary sense. There are no battles or processions here, no building projects or imperial decrees. And yet the room is full of transformations. Waking becomes sleeping. Conscious thought becomes dream. The self becomes porous. That is quiet drama, the kind that happens every night. We might pause then on the image of a person lying in darkness with some unresolved question in the heart, perhaps a decision about work, perhaps worry about illness, perhaps grief, perhaps simple curiosity. They close their eyes. They ask, not always with words, for the night to answer. In ancient Egypt, such a moment may have been accompanied by ritual or prayer. In any case, it was human. There is comfort in knowing that these moments are not new. The same wishes have crossed centuries. People have always wanted clarity. They have always wanted healing. They have always wanted to know whether the future can be sensed, if only in fragments. Dreams offered one of the oldest forms of that possibility. At the same time, the Egyptians also valued practical knowledge. They knew when to sow, when to harvest, when the river would rise, how to build, how to write, how to preserve. Their interest in dreams did not replace practical intelligence. It existed beside it. This is a useful reminder. Curiosity about the invisible need not be irrational. It can simply be another mode of attention. In that spirit, we can think of the sleeping chamber as a site where practical life and symbolic life meet. The body rests because it must. The mind wanders because it can. The night is both a physical condition and a field of interpretation. Even the architecture may have reflected this, with spaces designed for coolness, privacy, protection, and perhaps ritual order. A room can influence how sleep feels, just as sleep can influence how a room is remembered. The exact rooms of ancient households have often vanished, but their absence leaves behind a kind of pale outline. We know that beds existed. We know that furnishings varied. We know that curtains, mats, wooden pieces, and household items played roles in domestic life. We know that houses were built with climate in mind. We know that the wealthy had more elaborate surroundings, while many others managed with far less. From these facts, the sleeping chamber emerges as a humble but essential part of the home, and because it is humble, it is easy to overlook. Yet history often hides its deepest continuity in such overlooked places. Kitchens, storage rooms, entryways, and sleeping areas are where life is actually lived. The grand facade of a temple or palace may attract attention, but the private chamber is where most hours pass. Most of life is not ceremonial. Most of life is a repeated pattern of ordinary needs. Sleep is one of the most ordinary and one of the most mysterious. This makes the ancient Egyptian sleeping chamber a good place for the mind to rest. It contains enough history to be interesting and enough quiet to be soothing. It invites imagination without demanding speed. It allows for facts but softly. It encourages us to think of people not as distant figures carved in stone, but as beings who became tired, who lay down, who dreamed, who rose again with the morning. Morning, of course, is part of the story too. The sleeper wakes. The dream is partly remembered or partly lost. The room returns. Sound returns. Work returns. The cycle begins again. This recurring return is one of the deepest patterns in all ancient civilizations. Egypt watched the sun do it every day. The sleeper reenacts it every night. Darkness yields to light. Sleep yields to waking. The pattern is small and vast at once. Perhaps that is why dreams were seen as worthy of attention. They occur in the hidden middle of a cycle where the body has left one state but not yet entered the next. They are transitional, and transitions are often where meaning concentrates. Ancient peoples, especially those in Egypt, seem to have understood this with unusual sensitivity. We can think too of the role of memory. Many dreams are built from memory, even when they feel new. The mind rearranges familiar pieces, blending recent events with older impressions. In a culture with strong traditions and long continuity, memory itself would have been cherished. Names of ancestors, formulas, stories, rituals, and myths all formed a deep cultural memory. Dreams, then, may have felt like a private version of that same process, old material returning in new shape. Sometimes a dream is remembered not for its plot, but for its atmosphere, a sense of standing in a long corridor, a feeling of being watched by a statue, the color of the sky, the sound of water, the unease or comfort that lingers after waking. Ancient dream interpreters would likely have listened carefully to such details, knowing that significance often lives in the mood rather than the literal event. And ancient Egypt, with its long attention to mood in art and ritual, would have been an especially fitting place for such interpretations. The visual language of the culture is full of calmness, symmetry, and symbolic layering. A dream, too, can be read as a kind of composition, where figures and settings hold more than one meaning at once. If we stay with that image, we might imagine a sleeping chamber as a small composition in itself, the bed placed with intention, the vessel near at hand, the room kept orderly, perhaps a protective figure on a wall or an amulet near the pillow. Not all such details are known for every household, of course, but it is natural to suppose that people arrange their spaces with a wish for safety and peace. Even the simplest room can become a sanctuary when night falls. This sanctuary was not sealed off from larger belief. In ancient Egypt, the line between domestic life and religious life was often porous. Offerings, prayers, charms, and habits of reverence could enter the household without fanfare. A sleeping chamber might therefore have held more spiritual weight than a modern bedroom usually does. Yet even if we set aside that weight, the room remains important because sleep itself is important. One cannot live without it. How remarkable, then, that a civilization so concerned with eternity also depended each night on surrender. The body had to let go. Control had to soften. Consciousness had to dim. In a world that celebrated lasting names and enduring monuments, sleep reminded everyone of impermanence, and dreams, even more so, showed that the mind is always moving, never fixed. The beauty of the ancient sleeping chamber lies partly in that paradox. It is a place of rest, but not of emptiness, a place of stillness, but not of death. a place where the self steps aside without disappearing, a place where the ancients, like us, entered every night and emerged changed, even if only by a little. And when one thinks of change in so slow and subtle a form, it becomes easier to relax. Not all transformation is dramatic, much of it is tiny. A dream remembered, a worry eased, a body rested, a breath deepened, a morning slightly brighter than the night before. Ancient history is made of such small continuities. The sleeping chamber, then, is not merely an artifact of antiquity. It is a reminder of the human condition. We are creatures who build and then we lie down. We seek answers and then we sleep. We make meanings and then the mind makes its own. We try to preserve and yet much is lost. Still, something remains. The rhythm, the habit, the fragile trust that rest will return us to ourselves. And perhaps the Egyptians, with their careful attention to the hidden order of things, would have appreciated that thought. They understood cycles not as repetition without purpose, but as a deep form of continuity. The night does not erase the day, it gathers it. Sleep does not end consciousness, it transforms it. Dream does not abandon the world entirely, it rearranges it. So the chamber remains quiet in the imagination. The lamp burns low. The walls hold the last warmth of the day and then release it. The sleeper drifts somewhere between the known and the unknown. Outside, the ancient night stretches over the river and the fields and the temples. Inside, there is only breath and the patient unfolding of sleep. And that is enough. Enough history, enough mystery, enough hush. The old world rests. The modern mind rests with it. The dream books are closed for the moment. The questions can wait. The chamber of sleep is not asking for anything now. It is only offering its long, quiet invitation to soften, to slow, to drift, and to let the ancient and the present meet in the same peaceful dark. And as we remain with that peaceful dark, it is comforting to imagine that darkness in ancient Egypt was never entirely empty. Night had its own presences. The sky itself was not simply a blank canopy, but a vast living expanse imagined in many forms across long centuries. Stars travelled there. Gods sailed there. The sun, each evening, seemed to leave the visible world and enter a secret journey beneath the horizon. To people who lived close to the rhythms of river, season, and sky, this nightly vanishing was not trivial. It was one of the great mysteries of existence. So if a person lay down in a sleeping chamber at the end of the day, they were not only resting their body, they were entering a larger pattern shared by the sun, by the moon, by the fields, and by every creature that pauses when the light goes away. There is something deeply soothing in that thought. Sleep does not isolate us. It joins us to the oldest motions of the world. The ancient Egyptians, like many people in early civilizations, paid close attention to regularity. They watched the flood of the Nile, the return of stars, the cycle of planting and harvest, the rising and setting of the sun. Such patterns offered orientation in a world that could otherwise feel vast and unpredictable. A sleeping chamber, in its own modest way, belonged to this same human desire for order. The room might have been arranged so that a person could lie down in relative comfort, with the body slightly raised, protected from insects or dampness or stray drafts. Simplicity itself could become a form of care. And because preservation mattered so much in Egyptian life, it is interesting to think about what kinds of things were considered worth keeping nearby, even in spaces devoted to rest. Small objects often carry large meanings: a comb, a cosmetic jar, a linen cloth, a piece of jewelry put aside for tomorrow, a figurine, a charm, a household tool set neatly within reach. Each one tells us that the sleeping chamber was not a severed island, but part of the daily texture of living. The room was practical, yet it could also be intimate. It held the ordinary evidence of a life continuing from one day to the next. One can picture the quiet care of those daily arrangements: a bed straightened, a reed mat smoothed, a lamp placed where its light would not disturb too much, perhaps a family member moving softly through the room, perhaps the last murmur of conversation fading into silence. In a world without electric light, night brought a very different scale of darkness. Darkness was not evenly conquered. It was managed respectfully with small flames and accustomed routines. That makes the sleeping chamber feel especially tender, because it was one of the few places where the body could withdraw from the wider world. The ancient Egyptians knew many kinds of sacred space: temples, tombs, shrines, places of offering, sites marked by stories of gods and kings. But the sleeping chamber belongs to a quieter sacredness, one less formal and perhaps more universal. It is sacred because human life is vulnerable there. A sleeper is exposed, yet also protected by trust. Even today, lying down at night requires a kind of surrender that feels almost ceremonial. In that sense, the ancient room and the modern room are not so distant. Both ask the same gentle question: can you let the day go now? The answer, thankfully, is often yes. It may help to remember that ancient Egypt was not one unbroken culture, but many centuries of changing habits and local traditions. A sleeping chamber in one period would not have looked exactly like one in another. A palace room would differ greatly from an ordinary household room. A wealthy home might have finer materials, carved furniture, and more elaborate decoration. A modest dwelling might have relied on mats, simple beds, and the practical use of space. Even so, the central purpose would have remained constant. People needed a place to rest. They needed a place where the body could be laid down in safety. There is something quietly moving in that continuity across time. Civilizations rise and change, languages shift, dynasties come and go, yet the need to sleep remains. The need to wake rested remains. The need for a room where one can withdraw from danger remains. This may be one of the most durable truths in all human history, and perhaps one of the most overlooked because it is so ordinary. But ordinary things are often the most revealing. When archaeologists study domestic spaces, they are often not looking for grandeur. They are looking for traces: a fragment of a wall, a piece of a bed frame, a pottery sherd, a smear of pigment, a footprint in dried mud. A sleeping chamber can rarely be recovered in its full softness, because softness does not survive well in the earth. Yet even the smallest trace can suggest a life once lived in quiet repetition. Someone slept there. Someone rose there. Someone perhaps had a restless night there, or a peaceful one, or both at different times. The room becomes a kind of echo, and echoes are fitting for bedtime listening because they suggest that what is distant can still be near enough to hear. Ancient Egyptian life often reaches us in fragments. We glimpse it through objects, texts, paintings, and tomb scenes. But fragments do not mean insignificance. A fragment can be enough to open a whole world. A painted detail of a bed, a scene of someone preparing for the night, a reference to sleep in a medical text, a charm intended to ward off harmful forces in darkness. All of these can illuminate the broader atmosphere of the chamber. The Egyptians were practical people in many ways, but they were also deeply imaginative. They gave shape to unseen forces. They named the movements of the heavens. They recognized that sleep was not wholly under human control. No one can command the moment when fatigue becomes surrender. No one can demand a dream and receive it on cue. Sleep arrives like a gentle visitor, and sometimes not even gently. It comes whether one is ready or not. This uncertainty likely made the night feel both ordinary and mysterious. It is easy to imagine that a sleeping chamber would therefore have held not only furniture and vessels, but also habits of reassurance, a familiar arrangement, a protective gesture, a prayer spoken inwardly or under the breath, perhaps a bedside object associated with safety, much as people in other times have kept a cherished token nearby. Ancient Egypt was rich in amuletic thinking. Protection could be woven into life in subtle ways, from jewelry to inscriptions to images. Even if we cannot always know the exact details of a specific sleeping space, it is reasonable to feel that the desire for protection would have followed a person into the night. There is another gentle thought here as well. Sleep is one of the few daily experiences that makes every person equal. Rank matters less when the eyes are closed. The king sleeps, the farmer sleeps, the priest sleeps, The child sleeps, the old sleep, the tired sleep. In this, ancient Egypt was no different from any other society. Its hierarchy was real and elaborate, but night softened distinction. The sleeping chamber, whether humble or splendid, became a place where life returned to its bare essentials: breath, warmth, rest, vulnerability, dream, and perhaps that equality was part of what made sleep such a profound subject for ancient thought. Dreams could feel like visits from elsewhere. They might be understood as messages, warnings, visitations, or reflections of the soul's wandering. Egyptian dream interpretation survived in texts that suggest people tried to read meaning into the sleeping mind. A dream of water might signify one thing, a dream of a snake another. The sleeping chamber, then, was not only a room of rest but a threshold room, a place from which the mind could travel. This does not need to be imagined in a dramatic way. Dream travel need not be thunderous. It is often delicate, half-seen, made of transitions so soft they are difficult to describe in daylight. One moment there is the room, the bed, the boundary of the body. The next there is another scene, another landscape, another logic. Ancient people knew this shift as intimately as we do. They may not have used our language for it, but they knew the feeling of waking with a strange image still lingering, or the quiet unease of an interpreted dream, or the relief of a dream that seemed favorable. The Egyptians' concern with the afterlife can sometimes make their attention to sleep seem unsurprising, almost inevitable. After all, if one thinks deeply about what happens after death, one may also think about what happens each night. Both involve surrender. Both involve entering a realm where ordinary waking control is no longer sufficient, yet sleep is also different from death in a crucial and reassuring way. Sleep returns us, morning comes, the body resumes. The room is the same, though the mind may be changed. This repeated return may have given ancient people a rhythm of trust in the larger cycle of existence. A sleeping chamber in an ancient house would have been shaped by climate as well. Egypt's heat made shade precious. The dryness of the air influenced materials and preservation. At night, cooler temperatures may have made the room more bearable after the day's heat, especially if the chamber was built with some attention to ventilation and arrangement. The simple physical facts of environment are worth remembering because they remind us that the ancient world was not abstract. It was lived through skin and breath and temperature and texture. A comfortable sleeping space was not a luxury only, it was part of survival and well-being. In some households, sleep may have been shared. In others, individuals may have had separate spaces depending on status and family structure. There were likely many different domestic arrangements across ancient Egypt, and what we can know is incomplete. But it is easy to imagine the general atmosphere: the hush after work, the stillness of clay walls cooling in the dark, the day's dust settling, perhaps a faint scent of oil, linen, or plant material, perhaps the soft rustle of fabric, perhaps the distant cry of an animal outside. These are modest details, but they make history feel lived rather than merely studied. The ancient Egyptians were also skilled at living with limits. They did not imagine perfect control over the world, and this may have contributed to the grace of their rituals and customs. A sleeping chamber, too, would have accepted limits. It could not hold back every insect, every sound, every fear. It could not guarantee undisturbed rest, yet it could offer the best conditions possible within human means. There is something wise in that. A room need not be perfect to be restful. It only needs to be arranged with enough care to tell the body that it may release itself for a while. And the body, once reassured, often does release. It sinks into the bed or mat, the shoulders loosen, the jaw softens, the breath slows, the world becomes less demanding. In modern life, such transitions are often rushed, interrupted by screens and noise and thought. But in imagining ancient Egypt, we can allow the pace to become slower. We can picture a time in which night was genuinely dark, silence more complete, and sleep more closely tied to the body's natural response to the setting sun. Still, even then, not every sleeper would have been calm. Some nights are heavy, some are restless, Some are filled with worries about work, family, illness, harvest, or fortune. Ancient texts show that people have always known anxiety. The sleeping chamber did not erase this, it only held it, and perhaps that is part of its quiet dignity. It was not a magical solution. It was a place where one could be human in the ordinary way with all the frailty that entails. There is an almost tender irony in the fact that so many ancient spaces survive to us now only because they were later sealed, buried, or forgotten. What was once everyday became archaeological. What was once used and touched became an object of study. This is true of houses, tombs, storerooms, and private chambers alike. Time transforms domestic life into evidence. A cup becomes a clue. A floor becomes a record. A sleeping chamber, if it survives at all in traces, becomes a window into a private rhythm long ended. And yet the privacy is never entirely lost. Even in ruins, a room can retain something of its intended mood. The dimensions, the orientation, the remaining objects, the arrangement of entrances and walls, all can suggest the feeling of a place. A narrow chamber may seem more enclosed. A room with a raised platform may suggest a bed. A softly plastered wall may imply care. The imagination meets the evidence halfway, and there in that gentle meeting, history becomes intimate. Ancient Egypt often reminds us that the most enduring things are not always the biggest. A pyramid endures, of course, and so do temples and inscriptions, but so does a habit, so does a pattern of daily rest, so does the human hope for a safe place to sleep. It is easy to forget that great civilizations are held together by countless small acts of maintenance. Someone swept. Someone stored, someone mended, someone prepared a bed, someone lowered a lamp, someone made the room ready for another night. These actions rarely become famous, but they are the texture of civilization itself. If one were to sit quietly at the edge of such a chamber and listen, the sounds would likely be few. The faint settling of materials in the cooling night, the distant movement of the household, perhaps the murmur of the river world beyond. And above all, the patient silence that seems to deepen as a room empties itself of waking life. That silence is not blank, it is full of expectation, memory, and rest. One of the loveliest things about ancient history is how much it asks us to imagine not only public spectacle but private feeling. What did a person think as they lay down? Did they feel gratitude for the day's end, worry for tomorrow, relief, drowsiness, a sense of divine presence? A fatigue so complete that thought itself became slow? We cannot know, but the questions are kind ones. They invite us to imagine the old world as inhabited by minds not so different from our own. The chamber becomes a shared human space across millennia, and within that shared space, myth enters softly. Egyptian mythology is full of movement through darkness, of journeys through hidden regions, of protective deities and nightly renewals. The sun god's passage through the underworld is among the grandest of these images, yet its scale does not make it remote from the sleeping chamber. On the contrary, it makes the room feel like a small reflection of cosmic order. Every night the world sleeps and then is reborn in light. Every sleeper goes down into unconsciousness and returns in the morning. The pattern is not identical, but the resemblance is profound. This may be one reason why sleep could be understood as both ordinary and sacred. It was ordinary because it happened nightly. It was sacred because it touched the deepest patterns of existence. In this way, ancient Egyptian sleep culture belongs to a much wider human history of making meaning from bodily rhythms. We do not simply close our eyes and disappear. We cross a threshold. We enter a condition that philosophers, priests, physicians, poets, and ordinary people have all tried to understand. The sleeping chamber is the architecture of that threshold. There is also the matter of time itself. Ancient Egypt teaches patience. It teaches us to think in layers. A room used for sleeping might be remodeled, repaired, abandoned, or repurposed across generations. A bed might be replaced. A wall might be replastered. A household might change, yet the room's basic logic persists. This is how domestic history often works. It is incremental. It is not a single story, but a sediment of stories. and sleep with its nightly recurrence is one of the most layered experiences we have. If we let the imagination wander gently through those layers, we might see mornings as well as nights. The sleeping chamber at dawn would be different from the sleeping chamber at dusk. Morning light might reveal the room's simple geometry. The bed would look less like a refuge and more like a practical object. The vessel by the side would be useful. The chamber would resume its role in the day's order. Yet perhaps some trace of night would remain, the way a dream's afterglow remains in the mind for a few moments after waking. Ancient rooms, like ancient lives, were continuously transformed by use, and because the script of a day is repeated in countless households, there is a tenderness in noticing how universal such transformations are. Evening gathers, night deepens, sleep comes, morning returns. Across the desert and across the centuries, this rhythm has kept company with human beings everywhere. The ancient Egyptian sleeping chamber was one setting among many, but it is a beautiful one to imagine because it combines craftsmanship, mystery, and everyday need. One may even think of silence as a material in the room, not just what is absent, but what is present in a subtle way. The silence of nighttime in ancient Egypt would not have been the silence of a modern sealed apartment, because the world outside would still be full of living sounds. Yet inside, the chamber could hold a close and breathable quiet. This kind of quiet is not loneliness, it is shelter, and shelter is a word that belongs to all eras. People seek it from weather, from danger, from noise, from uncertainty, from fatigue. The sleeping chamber sheltered the vulnerable transition between waking and dreams. It offered a boundary, however imperfect, between the self and the vastness of the night. Even that boundary, modest as it was, mattered. Human beings are fragile enough to need walls and roofs, yet imaginative enough to make those walls and roofs meaningful. When we think of ancient Egypt, we often picture gold, stone, ceremony, and the grandeur of the afterlife. But there is equal value in picturing linen, reed, clay, and the hush of a room where someone is simply trying to rest. The quiet life of a civilization is often its most revealing life. A sleeping chamber tells us that beneath the ceremonies and monuments there was always the ordinary wish to be safe, warm, and undisturbed. This is perhaps why bedtime stories about ancient history can feel so comforting. They allow the mind to drift among the ruins without alarm. They let curiosity soften into calm. They show that history is not only a record of battles and rulers, but of thresholds, routines, and small mercies. The sleeping chamber in ancient Egypt belongs to that gentler side of history. It is not loud. It is not triumphant. It is simply present, quietly human. So let us imagine it once more in no hurry. The room is still. The lamp has dimmed or gone out. The air is warm enough to be familiar, cool enough to invite rest. A bed or mat waits. A few personal things rest nearby. The walls, however plain or decorated, hold the memory of the day. Outside, the night moves over the river lands and the desert edges. The stars appear one by one, old as wonder. Somewhere in the invisible country of sleep, dreams begin to gather. And that is where the chamber leads us, not to a final answer, but to a softer understanding. Ancient people slept. They dreamed. They protected their rest as best they could. They lived among gods and dust, among rivers and stones, among practical needs and invisible meanings. Their sleeping chambers were small, but the feelings they contained were large: trust, fatigue, hope, curiosity, and the wish for safe return. Now, as the room in the imagination grows even quieter, it is easy to feel the old world settling around us like a blanket. The questions remain, but they no longer press. The mysteries can sleep too. The river keeps moving. The stars keep watch. The chamber keeps its calm. And we, for a little while, may do the same, letting history fade gently into darkness, letting thought become soft, letting the ancient night and the present night rest together in the same peaceful hush. The chamber's quiet does not ask to be solved all at once. It simply invites us to remain near it, to notice what can still be noticed, and to accept that some details survive only in fragments. A wall painting here, a bed frame there, a mention in a text, a preserved box, a broken comb, a lamp soot-darkened at the rim. These small traces are enough to suggest a life. Not a dramatic life, perhaps, but a real one, the kind that unfolded day after day beneath the sun and the stars. Ancient Egypt, for all its fame, was not made only of monuments. It was made of rooms. Rooms for storage, rooms for washing, rooms for weaving, rooms for eating, rooms for thinking, rooms for sleeping. And among these, the sleeping chamber has a special intimacy because it was used at the edge of consciousness. One enters it carrying the residue of the day. One leaves it changed, if only by the passage through dream or the relief of rest. This is true in any age. The room becomes a place where the mind loosens its grip. Sometimes the chamber may have been simple, almost spare. In homes of ordinary people, there might have been only a mat, a platform, a chest, a folded cloth, perhaps a mosquito net in later periods, perhaps not. The simplicity itself is moving. It suggests that even without luxury, people still made a place for sleep with care. Care appears in how a mat is laid down. Care appears in the ordering of objects close at hand. Care appears in the decision to keep a room clean enough for breath and rest. These are small acts, but they belong to a deep human instinct. In more comfortable homes, beds could be raised from the floor, which had practical benefits. Elevation could help with air flow and with keeping away some insects and dust. The bed itself might be made of wood, a precious material in a land where good timber was not always abundant. Egypt had reeds, papyrus, mud brick, stone, and other resources in abundance, but certain woods had to be imported from farther places. This makes the surviving wooden objects all the more interesting. They reveal trade routes stretching quietly beyond the Nile Valley. Even a bed could be evidence of connection. One may imagine the soft labor hidden inside such an object. Someone selected wood. Someone cut, joined, shaped, smoothed. Someone perhaps wove straps or fashioned supports. Someone may have added a footboard or carved details simply because the room deserved beauty. The finished bed then entered the most ordinary of human cycles: use, rest, wear, repair, and eventual replacement. A great deal of history lives inside such quiet cycles. Nothing has to be monumental in order to matter. The bedroom may also have held objects that carried a sense of protection. In ancient Egypt, daily life and spiritual life were never far apart. A room could be both practical and meaningful. Amulets, small figurines, inscribed objects, or images of protective deities may have been present in some homes or kept nearby in other private spaces. The idea of sleeping under protection is old and familiar. People have always wanted to feel that the night itself, which can seem large and unknown, is not completely unguarded. The sleeping chamber could become a small island of order within that larger sea of darkness. One can think, too, of the lamps. Ancient lamps were modest things, often simple oil vessels with a wick. Their light would have been steady but limited, and that limitation itself shaped the mood of the room. There is something calming about a small lamp in darkness. It does not conquer the night. It negotiates with it. It marks out a gentle circle of visibility and leaves the rest to mystery. A bedroom lit in this way would feel not harsh or exposed, but enclosed and tender. The light would touch only the edges of things, and perhaps that is enough before sleep. If the room belonged to a wealthy household, the atmosphere may have been different in scale, but not entirely different in feeling. There might have been finer furniture, better textiles, painted decoration, or a more elaborate layout. The wealthy of ancient Egypt could arrange their private spaces with a degree of luxury that reflected status and taste. Yet even in a grander chamber, the purpose of the room remained humble. Eventually everyone must rest. Status may alter the furnishings, but it cannot alter the need. Sleep is democratic in the deep sense. It comes to all who live. The same is true of dreams, those strange visitors that ancient people encountered just as we do now. Dreams were not always dismissed as random. In many ancient cultures, including Egypt, they could be taken seriously as messages, omens, hints from the gods, or expressions of the soul's hidden movement. The sleeping chamber, then, was not only a place where the body lay down, it was a place where the mind could wander into symbolic landscapes. A person might awaken with a feeling, a warning, a comfort, or a puzzle. Even without a clear interpretation, the dream itself could seem important, as though the night had spoken in a language too subtle for daytime. This sense of meaningful dreaming appears in some surviving ancient texts from Egypt, where dreams were recorded, categorized, or interpreted. Such texts remind us that people across the millennia have tried to make sense of the same elusive experience. A dream of water, a dream of a gate, a dream of teeth, a dream of a god, a dream of falling, a dream of receiving bread. These images recur in different forms through many cultures. The chambers of sleep, though private, were never entirely separate from the larger imagination of a civilization, and yet one should not overstate the mystery at the expense of the ordinary. Most nights, even then, likely contained little that would have seemed grand. People were tired. The body needed rest after labor in fields, workshops, kitchens, construction sites, temples, markets, and homes. The sun in Egypt could be bright and demanding, and a warm climate can make sleep both a relief and a challenge. Night would bring a welcome cooling, a loosening of muscle, a descent into quiet. The sleeping chamber answered that need. It was a place where the day could end without ceremony. In a household with children, the chamber might have included the soft disruptions of family life. A child might not wish to sleep. Another might wake and ask for water. Someone might stir and turn. A parent might hush with a touch. Even in ancient times, the bedroom was likely a place of repeated tenderness and routine. The room did not need to be ideal to be meaningful. Indeed, it may be the imperfection of the domestic scene that makes it so believable. A family room at night has always held both order and small disturbances, both weariness and affection. For a lone sleeper, the room may have felt differently. Solitude in the dark can be peaceful, but it can also sharpen awareness. The sounds of the house settling, the faint movement of air, the occasional insect or animal sound from beyond the walls, the whisper of fabric, all of this might have become more noticeable in the stillness. Ancient Egyptians lived close to the natural world in ways modern people often do not. The outside world was never entirely far away. Even a sealed room might still carry the scents and sounds of nearby life. The chamber was private, yes, but never fully isolated from its environment. It is interesting to think of the materials from which such rooms were made. Mud brick, so common and practical, held warmth during the day and might cool slowly at night. Walls could be whitewashed or painted depending on status and taste. Doorways might be simple openings or framed with care. Floors could be packed earth, plaster, or more refined surfaces. None of this sounds extravagant, yet all of it shapes the feeling of a room. The texture of the floor, the smoothness of the wall, the way a mat settles, the way sound travels or softens, all these physical details contribute to the atmosphere before sleep. And because so many homes in ancient Egypt were built from perishable materials, much of the domestic world has vanished. This absence is itself part of the story. The great stone temples and tombs have endured, but everyday houses have largely returned to dust. The result is that the intimate spaces of ancient life are harder to know. We infer them from remains, from models, from depictions, from objects found in burials, from settlement archaeology, and from comparisons across sites. The sleeping chamber, then, stands partly in the light and partly in shadow. We can glimpse it, but not fully inhabit it. Perhaps that is fitting for a room meant for night. One of the most compelling things about ancient domestic life is how much of it may have been familiar. A bed positioned for comfort, a container for personal items, a textile folded nearby, a desire for air circulation, a concern for cleanliness, a wish for security, a private area separated from public life as much as the house allowed. These habits are not exotic, they are almost tender in their familiarity. They remind us that ancient people did not live in constant grandeur or ritual intensity. They also lived in the rhythm of work, rest, and ordinary care. The chamber may have had a distinct relationship to privacy, although privacy in antiquity does not always align neatly with modern ideas. Houses could be compact, family members might share spaces, servants or dependents might move through them. The sleeping area, however, still suggests a soft boundary, a space where one might retreat from the presence of others, or where a family could gather with the day's end. Even a partial boundary matters. Human beings need places where attention can lower, where vigilance can ease, where the body can stop performing and simply be. It is easy to imagine the transition from waking to sleep in such a room. A person may have performed small evening routines, perhaps washing, changing garments, arranging a headrest, dimming a lamp, closing a door flap, straightening a mat. These actions, repeated almost without thought, form a kind of ritual of ordinary life. Not ceremonial in the grand sense, but ceremonious in the sense that they prepare the mind for a change of state. The body recognizes patterns, the room learns its own signals, sleep approaches through familiarity. The headrest in particular offers a quiet window into ancient Egyptian sleeping habits. Unlike a soft modern pillow, a headrest was often a curved support, raised and firm, designed to keep the head elevated. To modern sensibilities it may seem unusual, but it had practical advantages in warm climates and in contexts where hairstyle or cleanliness mattered. Headrests have been found in stone, wood, ivory, and other materials. Some are beautifully made, yet even the most modest examples speak to the same universal concern: how to rest the body with some comfort and care. A headrest is an object that knows the night. There is something almost symbolic about that. The head, seat of thought, needing a support as thought prepares to relinquish control. The body is clever in its own way. It arranges what it needs so that the mind may loosen its grip. A chamber full of such small functional things becomes quietly profound when viewed with patience. It is not a shrine in the obvious sense, yet it is a shrine to rest. Not a temple to gods, perhaps, but a temple to recovery, to the preservation of life through sleep. And sleep, in ancient Egypt as now, was never merely biological. It was bound up with the larger rhythm of the cosmos. The Egyptians were deeply attentive to cycles: day and night, flood and dryness, birth and death, order and disturbance. The sun god's journey across the sky and through the underworld offered a mythic pattern for the passage of darkness into dawn. Every night became a tiny version of a cosmic descent and return. The sleeping chamber, by housing the sleeper, became a small theatre of that pattern. One lay down as the sun set and rose again, if all was well, with the morning. This may be one reason why night carried both comfort and seriousness. Darkness was not an enemy to be banished entirely. It was a necessary interval in the world's breathing. In myth, in ritual, in daily life, night had its own dignity. A chamber designed for sleep respected that dignity. It did not fight the night. It prepared for it. It allowed a person to cross into it safely and perhaps even with trust. That trust is one of the deepest and most beautiful things a room can hold. The ancient Egyptians were also practical observers of their environment. They understood heat, light, wind, insects, and seasonal change because they lived amid them. A sleeping space might be arranged to catch a cooler breeze, to avoid certain exposures, or to benefit from shading. Doors, windows, curtains, and the placement of furniture all mattered. Even when we cannot reconstruct every detail, we can imagine the intelligence of adaptation. Human beings are always negotiating with climate. The bedroom is one of the places where that negotiation becomes personal. Some rooms may have opened onto courtyards or inner household spaces, while others would have been more enclosed. The presence of a courtyard, if available, could have changed the evening air. One might hear the last movements of the household, the settling of domestic animals, the faint clink of a vessel, the rustle of palms or reeds in the breeze. Such sounds are not disruptive in the same way city noise can be today. They are part of a lived ecology. They remind the sleeper that life continues around the chamber, but in a softened register. It is also worth thinking about how sleep was woven into the social structure of ancient Egypt. who had a private sleeping chamber and who did not, who slept alone and who shared, which homes had enough space for separate rooms and which relied on multi-use areas. These questions open onto broader realities of class, labor, family size, and architecture. Not everyone enjoyed the same level of comfort or separation. Some slept in more exposed circumstances, perhaps in communal settings or in work environments. Others had greater privacy. The chamber, therefore, is not only a symbol of rest, but also of social possibility. Access to a quiet sleeping space was itself a privilege in many contexts. At the same time, even the simplest sleeping arrangement could still be dignified. A mat on a clean floor in a shaded corner can be a place of peace. A woven cover can feel like wealth at the moment of fatigue. The human capacity to find comfort is broad. Ancient people knew how to make do, how to improvise, how to arrange a small haven from what was available. In that skill there is both resilience and artistry. The sleeping chamber, whether simple or refined, is an expression of that art of making do with grace. Sometimes we picture ancient life as if it were forever ancient, as if every moment was aware of its own distance from us. But the people who used these rooms were not living in a museum. They were living in the present tense of their own day. They worried about food, family, weather, health, work, and the future. They laughed, argued, mended, stored, slept, and rose. The chamber belongs to this ordinary present tense. It is not a relic first. It is a room first, that matters. It returns the human scale to history. And yet the room can still feel mysterious because time has thinned its surfaces. We do not know the names of most of its users. We do not know the exact arrangement of many chambers. We do not know every custom, every preference, every variation across regions and centuries. Ancient Egypt lasted for a very long time and practices changed. A sleeping chamber from one era would not be identical to one from another. There is Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and later periods, each with its own patterns in architecture and material culture. This long span makes the topic richer because it reminds us that even a familiar thing such as a bed was part of history's slow change. Furniture styles evolved, house plans evolved, materials and trade connections changed. The influence of neighboring cultures ebbed and flowed. Some features of domestic life may have become more refined over time, while others remained strikingly continuous. Through all of this, the act of sleeping remained constant. That constancy is perhaps the most grounding fact of all. Empires shift, dynasties rise and fall, temples are built and buried, scripts are forgotten and deciphered, yet each night bodies still seek rest. There is a certain serenity in this thought. It places the human being inside continuity rather than exception. The sleeping chamber was one small node in a very large continuity of life on Earth. Long before modern beds, soft lights, and climate control, people made arrangements for rest. Long after the fall of a particular dynasty, the need persisted. This is why ancient domestic spaces can feel so intimate. They touch something that does not belong only to one culture or age. They touch the daily persistence of being alive. If one lingers a little longer in the imagination, one can notice the subtle sounds of preparation. A folded cloth brushing against a wooden surface, a vessel set down, a quiet footstep, the muffled movement of someone turning the lamp lower, the breath of night beyond the wall. The room is not empty exactly. It is full of intentions that have gone calm. The day's tasks are done or paused. Whatever remains unresolved can wait. There is room now for the body to remember its own limits. Some of the more curious details associated with ancient Egyptian domestic life involve cosmetics, grooming, and bodily care. People paid attention to oils, perfumes, combs, mirrors, and skin protection. This is not surprising in a hot climate, but it also reveals a broader aesthetic of life. A person may have entered the sleeping chamber after an evening wash, perhaps fragrant with oil or clean linen. Such details do not have to be extravagant to be pleasing. A clean face and a rested body are forms of quiet luxury. The room may have welcomed these small transitions from outward activity to inward calm. The presence of textiles in the chamber would have mattered as well. Linen, so famously associated with Egypt, could be used in clothing, wrappings, and household fabrics. Even if a sleeping room held only a few cloths, their texture would have contributed to the sense of comfort. Linen has its own character. It can be cool, crisp, and light. In a warm climate, this would have suited the night well. To settle beneath such fabric is to feel gently enclosed without heaviness. That kind of comfort is subtle, but it can make all the difference in the experience of sleep. One might ask what the room smelled like. It is an impossible question to answer exactly, and yet the question itself is fruitful. Perhaps there was the scent of oil, reed, dust, clay, body warmth, fabric, and the faint trace of whatever food had been prepared earlier in the household. Perhaps the air was dry. Perhaps there was a hint of river moisture if the house stood near water. Odor is one of the most elusive parts of the past, but it is also one of the most powerful in memory. To imagine a sleeping chamber is to imagine not only a visual space but an atmospheric one. The chamber may also have held silence in layers. Not a perfect silence, but a domestic silence, interrupted and shaped by the living world. Ancient houses would not have been acoustically sealed in the modern sense. Sounds from neighboring rooms, courtyards, or streets could drift in. Still, night tends to soften everything. Voices lower, movement slows. The world becomes more attentive to itself. A sleeping chamber joins that attenuation, becoming one of the places where loudness ends and continuity begins again. This gentle enclosure might have been especially important in a society that was deeply aware of order. The Egyptian concept of Ma'at, often translated as truth, balance, justice, or cosmic order, extended far beyond the courtroom or the temple. It touched the structure of life itself. A well-kept home, a predictable routine, a safe place to sleep, these too can be understood as expressions of order. The chamber becomes part of a moral and cosmic landscape. It helps hold life in balance. And if one considers the journey of sleep through the lens of myth, the chamber can be seen almost as a small underworld entrance, not frightening but necessary. The sleeper descends into unknown interior distances. Thoughts become less linear. Images arise unbidden. The body renews itself in ways the waking mind cannot supervise. Then, if all goes well, dawn returns the sleeper to the surface. Ancient myths of night journeys, rebirth, and divine passage echo this rhythm in a grander register. The room is small, but the pattern is vast. Sometimes history is most moving when it makes us aware of such shared patterns. A sleeping chamber in ancient Egypt does not need to be famous to matter. It matters because it held the human condition in miniature. A person lay down there with the weight of living behind them and the uncharted dark ahead. That is a very old experience. It belongs to farmers and priests, artisans and scribes, children and elders, the affluent and the modest. The details differ. The feeling is constant. There is also a kind of humility in the chamber. Unlike a throne room or a temple court, it asks no audience. Its purpose is not display. Even when decorated, it remains devoted to a private need. This humility may be one reason it feels so peaceful to imagine. The room does not insist on itself. It exists for recovery, for vulnerability, for the quiet governance of the body. In a culture known for monumental expressions, the chamber reminds us that the most essential human acts often happen away from spectacle. Many ancient objects associated with domestic life survive because they were placed in tombs, where they could endure better than in the ordinary world above ground. This gives us an indirect view of bedrooms, wardrobes, chairs, beds, boxes, and personal possessions. Tombs can be uncanny archives of the everyday, preserving things that otherwise would have decayed. A bed buried with someone tells a double story. It speaks of a life lived in comfort or status, and it also becomes a companion to the afterlife. The bedroom then extends beyond sleep into eternity, or at least into the ancient hope of continuity beyond death. That connection is especially poignant in Egypt, where the boundary between sleep and death could be imagined in overlapping ways without being identical. Sleep was a daily surrender and return, while death was a more final mystery. Yet both involved a laying down, a quiet, and a departure from waking control. A chamber for sleep may therefore have had a symbolic nearness to mortuary ideas, even if its purpose was practical. The Egyptians were attentive to the transitions of the soul, the body, and the night. In that sense, every bedtime may have had a faint echo of larger passages. Still, one should let the chamber remain a chamber. It is enough that it held rest. It is enough that it sheltered ordinary sleep from the sun's demands and the world's uncertainty. It is enough that it was arranged with human intention. There is no need to transform it into a grand allegory every time. Sometimes the beauty of history lies in the plain fact that people made places for themselves to lie down and rest. The plainness itself is sacred in a quiet way, so the imagination can continue to walk slowly around the room. It can notice the corner where a chest might stand. It can imagine a bundle of garments. It can imagine the smoothness of a wood surface touched by many hands. It can imagine a doorway partly open to the rest of the house. It can imagine dust settling by degrees and then the stillness of midnight deepening. Outside, the desert has its own dark vastness. Inside, the chamber keeps a human-scale darkness moderated by care. There may have been nights when sleep was difficult, of course. Heat can linger, worries can intrude, illness can unsettle the body, family concerns can keep the mind alert. Not every ancient night would have been peaceful. It is important not to romanticize too much, yet even difficult nights would have unfolded in the same rooms. The chamber held both ease and strain. It held the attempt to rest, even when rest was not immediate. That attempt is one of the most human things we know, and because we know it ourselves, the room remains close. We may sleep under different roofs and with different comforts, but the inner movement is familiar. We lie down, release a little, trust a little, and hope that the night will carry us. Ancient Egypt, with its long memory and its layered culture, offers us a beautiful setting for this universal ritual. The sleeping chamber is one of its quiet gifts to the imagination. It reminds us that history is not only a sequence of events, it is also a sequence of evenings. Evening after evening, the household would have changed its tone. Tasks would wind down, voices would soften. The day's brightness would withdraw from walls and floors. The room would become more itself in the presence of darkness. This change in atmosphere is easy to overlook because it happens so often, but perhaps that is why it feels so tender. Repetition gives comfort. The room can be trusted because it is familiar. The night can be trusted because it arrives in rhythm. The chamber participates in that trust. In the deepest sense, the sleeping chamber is a place where life rehearses its own relinquishment and renewal. Each evening says, in effect, let the burden rest. Each morning says, return if you can. Ancient Egyptians would have known this not as philosophy but as lived experience. Their homes, their objects, their texts, and their customs all whisper pieces of this understanding. A bed is not just a bed. A lamp is not just a lamp. A room for sleeping is a place where the body re-enters the mystery from which it will re-emerge. So the room grows quieter still. The lamp is low. The walls are dim. The air has settled. The last little movements of the household have passed into the distance. The sleeping chamber remains, holding its old and simple purpose with patience. No urgency lives here, no bright demand, only the invitation to rest, to drift, to be protected by darkness that is not empty but full of calm. And as we linger there, the ancient world becomes less distant. The stones and mud bricks, the linens and lamps, the beds and mats, the dreams and routines, all of it moves closer in the mind until it feels almost like memory. The chamber does not need to speak loudly to be heard. It speaks in the language of quiet, which is the language sleep already understands. So let the imagination settle. Let the questions grow gentle. Let the long river of history keep flowing beyond the walls. The room remains peaceful. The night remains kind. And in that kind night, The old chamber and the present moment can rest together for a while, softly, safely, and without hurry.